Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe, and this is one of my guests today. My other guest will be talking about what this is, how it works, and how he's used it to make new friends and help people see the world in new ways. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Jim Sutherland, professor of art at Montreat College, who developed his own version of an ancient predecessor to the camera and then brought it to children of depressed areas in the Appalachians to share with them the joys of creating artwork. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
You were flipping through a magazine and saw this design for the basic camera Obscura. What grabbed you?
I'd heard about it in earlier readings in school, and I thought, I have always been interested in optical things. So I just went to the barn and found all the objects I could and cobbled it together. It didn't do what it was supposed to do at that point, so over the years I've added improved lenses and mirrors and sort of made it my own.
And what is it supposed to do? What basically is the concept here?
Well, in this particular camera Obscura, the image is coming through a 4-inch magnifying glass and goes through another magnifying glass and is then reflected up to the viewer on a 45-degree angle. Mm-hmm. So what I've made of this particular device is to draw directly on the glass with a pen, and then I discovered that I could print that off of the glass. So I've created kind of a printmaking process.
Which we're going to actually do in a little bit,
right,
in just a few minutes. What kind of artwork had you been doing before you started working with this?
Well, I was trained as a printmaker, mm-hmm, and then a potter, and then a painter, and so they've all kind of melded together. I started this just as a printmaking process, but now I actually paint on top of these prints. So it's a combination of all of those.
And I want to play with it, so let's give it a try.
Okay, let's see. Your job is to choose the things that most describe what you're looking at.
All right.
And so you want to close your left eye, draw with your right eye, and you're outlining. You're basically tracing the contour line, we call it, around the things, and the amount of detail you put in there is really up to you.
All right, and I'm just going to draw on the glass with this marker. Here we go. Keeping it perfectly still is a little bit tricky. I have a lot of choices about which lines to draw, which parts of the picture to include in the still life. I keep seeing things I left out.
You can add more marks anytime.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the nice thing about a cup, it doesn't get impatient.
I think I'm ready.
Ready to print?
I love this, the camera Obscura you've built out of all kinds of parts. It's the bottom of a desk chair, and I see a suitcase handle here, and you told me that the wood is a plank from a barn?
Everything was a found object.
And your wife's makeup mirror was in here at one point?
She's still looking for it.
It looks, I mean, just the way the whole thing comes apart and goes together, you've tinkered with this machine quite a bit, huh?
30 years.
That's great, that's neat. Okay, so it's just plain paper?
Most any paper will work. This is a paper I've selected because it's very smooth and it gives a better line quality when I print. Mm-hmm. And I've soaked it in isopropyl alcohol, which is
just the rubbing alcohol?
Just a good old-fashioned rubbing alcohol.
And that's going to pick up this ink then?
That will pick up the ink. Now I guess I'll print for you if that's okay.
Sure.
Now I'm going to just place this right on the glass and line it up with your drawing. We want to make sure the paper doesn't move.
The moment of truth.
And we take this burnisher and very carefully just rub the back of the paper, very much like a linoleum print or a wood cut. Mm-hmm. And the alcohol in the paper is just enough to encourage the ink to lift from the glass onto the paper. It's not too much to make it watery. It's just enough to transfer the image. This is what I discovered in my kitchen in June 1st, 1981, when I was cleaning the glass. Oh. That's my claim to fame.
So this was sort of an accident.
It was, yeah. Oh. Well, the more you experiment, the more creative you are, the more things you discover, and then you take those and think about what you can do with them. Here we go. There it is. That's quite nice.
Why, thank you. So it's not really, it sounded simple enough to trace these objects, but it's a lot more complicated than it seemed at first, and it's really about the choices that you make, and that's where the art comes in, isn't it?
I think so. The more sophisticated or complicated the drawing, the more choices you are forced to make.
Thank you. Well, that was great. I enjoyed it. So you have been making this kind of art for a long time. When did you first start to think about making these drawings for children?
1980 was the first opportunity. I went to town and noticed the craft fair being set up and with pottery and jewelry and furniture and leather, and I thought they were very nice objects. And then I noticed the children running around kind of observing this, but they had no way that they could actually really acquire those objects. And I thought, they're being left out. I would like to do something for them too. So I went home and stayed up all night making the funny face on the front, and went back to offer drawing their portraits for free. So it became Art to the Two. They got to be part of the festival.
That's great. So it really was a way of just including people in getting to experience and acquire art. And now you go out on visits. You go to what, schools and craft fairs and stuff?
I've taken this to my own college classroom. I've taken it to the street and just see who comes. And it can be very sophisticated individuals, or it can be people who have never seen anything like that in their lives.
And so then you're doing primarily portraits. When did you start letting kids and other people do their own artwork with this?
Well, all along the way. If the impression they get is this is something I can't do. And as soon as I show them that I'm nothing special, and show them the simple process, they are willing, and then there's a great sense of satisfaction. They get a glow over them that I can do that as well.
Yeah, I thought, there's a whole lot more complexity that could come into this process, but the basics of it are really very simple and very satisfying, as you say.
I found in my writing about it that it takes the ego out of it. There's nothing that you're going to accomplish that anyone else can't accomplish, but you do get to make choices. And that's the fun part, especially the more complicated the image.
Right. Well, and so here are some of the pieces that you've done over the years, and there's a lot of variety here. You've done some pastel drawing, a lot of different medium. What's your favorite way to doctor these up?
Well, my favorite way now is not to doctor them up. The combination of oil paints over the monoprints was because I'm also a plein air painter. I paint on location. Landscapes are my love, and I do that almost every day. And
this is from a camera obscura.
That's a camera obscura drawing that's been colored with colored pencil in that particular case. But I've become very much interested in having the prints in color stand alone without any necessarily further tinkering with it.
That's amazing. And you've done, okay, so here's some oil painting and some just black and white. They're so, I mean.
That's a monoprint, a color print without any paint on it.
Well, how did you get the yellow and the green there?
Those are colored pens that are filled into the spaces defined by the black line.
It's so, I mean, I look at the complexity of these drawings. Some of them are fairly simple, but even this one would have just not jiggling and just staying patient and paying attention to what you've already done. Very impressive.
Well, you have to hold your breath while you do it.
I guess you do. So you've got to have good lung capacity to really do these well. Here are some pictures that kids have done. What were you hoping to see kids do as a result of experiencing this? I mean, what have you hoped for them?
I just hope that they would enjoy the process. I'm all about process. So if they are happy in the moment, and that's the secret of, I think, what I'm trying to get when I share this, is that there's something happening that's unique that will probably never happen any other way. This is a process that uses the eye and the mind and patience. So I don't have any goal anticipated for the results. The product is usually beautiful no matter how sophisticated it is.
And just that experience of even paying close attention to what they're seeing is special. Right here we've got a motorcycle, I guess?
That's a little plastic motorcycle on the table. Okay. I love that little drawing.
I do too. It's very simple and still life. This is, do the kids or the drawers set up their own still life?
Yes, they do.
Just grab whatever's around?
Usually a favorite toy or their brother.
Well, how hard is it to draw people?
Well, that's an interesting issue. When I'm drawing a landscape, I can be drawing a tree or rocks and water, and I can actually leave and get a drink of water and come back and realign everything and make all the choices and take hours. But with a person, because everyone moves a little bit and I move a little bit, I have to make a commitment to do the best I can at the time. Often it takes 4 or 5 drawings to get one that I'm happy with.
And I'm thinking, I mean, professional artists who use live models are usually professional live models who are used to sitting still, but these children have done, right, these pictures that we're looking at, and do they have to just draw really fast, or do you have to sedate the model?
Well, we were posing last night for one another at someone's home, and I was surprised at how long people are willing to sit. Yeah, 5 minutes is a long time, though, for some people.
Sure it is.
And children are particularly wiggly.
Yeah, and there's some shadowing in this that
those are done by college students.
That's quite something.
And you can see a little more sophistication, but the challenge is to draw exactly what you see and not what you think you know. And it's when they make that bridge, there's a learning moment there.
Do you work with your own students? I mean, so kids on the street who are just having this experience, that's one thing. Are there things that you try to teach your college students about process or about making these more elaborate?
Well, again, observation is the key to everything that I teach. Everything I teach is observe, interpret, create. So the camera obscura forces them. The world is overwhelming.
Right.
And this takes everything that's overwhelming and puts it in a contextual film format. Then you have to make choices. I believe that we all do things by intuition and choices, and our personality is based on that sort of thing. So I want them to slow down long enough to be willing to really observe what they're looking at.
Well, so I was going to ask, is artistic talent innate, or is it something that's taught? And what you seem to be saying is, talent aside, the ability to observe maybe is taught or acquired with practice.
Well, we all don't see the same way. That's one of the things I've learned in teaching, particularly in college. We don't actually see space the same way. So having a standard measurement is a bit of a problem there.
It does help. I mean, this idea of getting the perspective right is such a frustrating thing to learn to draw and translate. Why is that? We see what we think. We see what we think we know instead of what we're really looking at.
I think that's why there's a real place for R2D2 in the 21st century, because we're so distracted by so many things that we're doing with our hands and our mind and our eyes all the time. This really slows down. The time element is an important gift that you get from using that.
I've noticed that even from regular photography. The first time I bought a decent camera, suddenly I was paying a lot more attention to kind of framing everything I looked at. Whether or not I had the camera with me, I was sort of looking for shots, and I think it helps you appreciate what you're seeing.
Composition, number one. Yeah. There's a problem with photography that's been discussed a lot, that if you go on a journey and you carry a camera, quite often you're not really on the journey. You're vicariously recording it because you want to keep it. Right. And the thing about plein air painting and camera obscura is that you're there for a period of time and you must commit to that.
Oh, interesting.
And that doesn't happen a lot in the modern society.
You're with the thing that you're looking at.
You're with it. You're part of it.
Close to it.
Yeah.
And you're interacting with it in a way. What, so you've taken this to poor kids in the Appalachians, you've taken this to Bolivia.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about some of the experiences that you've had then with...
Well, just like the day I went to the fair, the festival, I went around the block with this thing in that festival, and 30-some children followed me like the Pied Piper under a big tree, and we drew. When I went to Bolivia, the same thing happened. Yeah. They were surrounding me, and I almost had to have someone help me keep them from crawling all over my shoulder. So they look in the lens and they look all over. What
were they wanting besides the unique experience, do you think?
Well, what I liked about it is that for one small part of time, another human being is actually looking them in the eye and looking at their features. And when I draw the portraits, I talk about how nice they look, or how I really like your earrings, or so there's a sense of worth that's established. Two people are actually talking to one another in a unique way. Yeah. That's a good thing.
This brings to mind a documentary called Born into Brothels, in which an artist takes her camera to Calcutta and ends up teaching photography to the poor kids living there, and we're going to watch a little bit of that.
কারণ হলো যে আমি ছবি তুলি এই শহরের লোকেরা কিভাবে থাকে খায় দায়, এরা রাস্তায় খায়, রাস্তায় থাকে বেশিরভাগ লোকেরা। কিন্তু গ্রামের লোকেরা একটা ছোট্ট ঘর মাটির, তার মধ্যে তারা খেয়ে দিয়ে ওইটা থাকে। আমাদের দেশে এমনি নোংরা কেউ আমাদের দেশের মধ্যে থাকে না। আমাদের যেখানেই চপ্পল থাকে সেখানেই খাবারের বাসন, কারণ অন্য কোনো দেশে আমি দেখিনি, কিন্তু আমাদের দেশে এর জন্যই আমাকে ছবি ভালো লাগে, যে মানুষের ব্যবহারটাকে বোঝাতে চাই আমি।
কার ছবি তোর বেশি ভালো হচ্ছে মনে হয়, তোর না মানিকের?
অভিজিতের। আমার হাতে যখন ক্যামেরা আছে আমার খুব আমার হয়তো কারোর ফটো কেউ হয়তো চলে গেছে, হারিয়ে গেছে বা মারা গেছে, যখন তার ফটোটা দেখবো তখন তার কথা চিন্তা করতে পারবো, তার কথা ভাবতে পারবো। আমার ছবি আঁকতে ভালো লাগে হচ্ছে আমার মনে যে দৃশ্যটা আছে সেটা সামনে প্রকাশ করতে, সেটা আমি নিজের রঙের দ্বারা, নিজের ভাবনার দ্বারা সেটাকে ফুটিয়ে তুলতে।
যখন ছোট অভিজিৎ তখনকার অভিজিতের ফটো, ছোট ফটো।
I love this because it's a self-portrait, but you can also see the street. You can see the environment where he is. And he's just got so many different kinds of pictures on this one contact sheet. I mean, the details here, windows and shutters and wires. So many different angles and things in the foreground and the background and men sleeping and walking and everything. Just very, very good contact sheet.
Does that remind you of anything that you've experienced?
It does. Memory. Any drawing that you do, you remember when you did it and where you did it. A photograph is the same thing. It's a documentation. Two things I noticed about the film. Children usually say the other person's work is better than mine. And when it's not always true.
True.
But a plein air painting or camera obscura drawing, I can remember the day, the weather. And so that's the value of pictures like that, I think.
Yeah. Do you have kids asking for particular kinds of drawings or compositions? I mean, what do they mostly want to do? Besides sort of play with the technology, what kinds of drawings do you find they want to do?
Items that they identify with, favorite toys. Quite often they want to draw their brother or sister. And usually I have even had them, if they were the subject of the drawing, go put on a favorite hat or some kind of a costume so they can identify with them. Right.
You have a picture of a boy who wanted to be drawn like Rocky in your book.
That happened one day back in the beginning, and he said, if you'll stay here, I'll run home and get makeup on. And I waited for him. He came back, and he was all excited. Quite often, they would bring their parents or the rest of their family back with them. I did some that were actually grandfather, grandmother, and child all in one picture.
What led you to all this? I mean, it's one thing to do your art and produce it for people. It's another, there's a sort of generous spirit about this. What led you to want to take this places?
I'm a very shy person, and this kind of breaks me out of that. It's something that kind of interfaces between me. That way I'm not, it's not me, it's about this. So we can kind of come together with something that doesn't have an ego either.
Do you have a different feeling of maybe accomplishment when you do, say, your pottery or an oil painting that doesn't originate with this versus the camera obscura product?
Well, there's always a surprise. When I'm controlling what I'm doing with the potter, I was a potter I did some very sophisticated pottery that took a lot of skill, a lot of ego, a lot of time and care. This, I do the same thing, but then I never know what I'm going to get. And because of the nature of the alcohol and the ink, there's always a little bit of unpredictable movement.
You don't know where it's going to smear or pick
and
up.
That's always a joy. So it's a little package that I get to open after I do the drawing.
A lot of great artists throughout history have been poor, have been materially poor. Do you think that there's a connection between that materialistic poverty and the ability to appreciate or to notice things more carefully?
I think it might be just the inverse. Sometimes the fewer objects and things we have, the more time we contemplate what's around us, the more sensitive we are to the real world versus some distractions that affluence often gives us.
So here's another way in which simply focusing on one object or moment or person
Sure.
allows you to really fully appreciate that. Do you see, what kind of long-term benefits do you see for the kids who get this experience? I mean, do you think it awakens artistic impulses in them or a need for that part of culture?
Anytime we affirm someone else and they have a sense of self-esteem, they carry that as a building block for the rest of their lives. I remember people who made me happy and made me feel worthwhile. They spent time reading to me or whatever it was. And then they usually keep that drawing if they, and they can relate back to that. So you relive it. It's like I said before about memory, that the print, the drawing is something that connects to a good time you've had in the past.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, it seems to me that it's not just about the past and not just about memory, but that it must shape self-esteem and what you value going forward.
I can give you an example.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman from China. He was a college student. So age really is irrelevant here.
Because it's new to most people.
It's all right, yeah. He had drawn his violin with his open eye, and he had tried to draw it over and over and over. And he couldn't reach a level of satisfaction. He had a very high level of expectation for himself. And I told him, I'll bring the camera Obscura and I'll let you try to see if that does something for you. And we put the violin on a table, and he did a beautiful rendering of his violin. And he was just bubbling over with it. He made a comment about, I draw in my culture this way. And in America, you've taught me to draw this way, but the camera Obscura has brought the two together, and now I see it in a new way.
Wow.
And the rendering was, in perspective, was absolutely perfect.
Which would be a very hard thing to do with a violin, I think, the curves.
Yes, indeed.
Angles. Gee. Well, that's great. The programs, National Endowment for the Arts has programs for cultivating the arts in schools, and of course we've gone back and forth over the decades with, do you teach this in the schools? Are art and music and dance and things like that important? And I've always thought, well, they're important because they make us more fully aware of our humanity, and what you're saying here is about relationships and about noticing what's around us. Can you make a practical argument for the need and the place of art?
When you take art to a room full of people, there's a tendency to want to do like this person does, or there's the satisfaction of having that clay in your hand or that paint in your hand is different in a group than it is on a one-to-one. R2D2 is a one-to-one.
Yeah.
Everybody else is watching. So there's something about the value of the one-to-one in terms of training or experiencing, affirming one another. It's different when it's like these children with the cameras. They have a one-to-one relationship with that camera.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, is there a difference between therapy and art here? Or?
Well, I still feel like I'm getting therapy every time I do. There's a sense of a thankfulness. I don't know if everyone would feel this, but when I'm making something, I feel like I'm doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I think of them as a little prayer, a little offering, a little bit of saying, I'm thankful for what I am able to see or experience.
Right.
So the end product is not nearly as important as the process.
Okay. I mean, that's interesting what you say about the difference between doing something like that in a group and doing it one-on-one.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking about that.
And doing it alone. I mean,
right.
then I think it can be, as you say, a little kind of prayer.
One of the things that happens frequently is I will demonstrate this and people will say, well, I really like your photography. And this is not a photographic process. Right. It's in the chronology of the evolution development of photography, it's right before the photograph was invented. And so it's always fun to see people, again, they think they know what they're looking at. So another level of learning is realizing that, oh, my assumptions, my set of assumptions about what just happened are not accurate. It's not a photographic process. There's no process like this anywhere I know.
Yeah.
It's a one of a kind.
Well, and I noticed as I was drawing the lantern, even if I moved my head by about 2 inches, the whole kind of shape of the lantern changed. I'm not sure how to, well, I guess it's just the angle.
I can explain that if you, the Fresnel lens is a series of circles with different angles. And as you're moving, it's actually showing you a different angle. If I put a flower in front of this camera, you would think it would be flat like a photograph and that moving my head wouldn't change anything. But I can actually move my head and see around the side of the the flower.
Because of the way the lens
Because of the
is
way that lens is put
pointing.
together. That always intrigues me to see that happen.
So it really...
So looking through there is a looking experience unlike any other looking experience. It's not to mention seeing, but just looking is different.
Does that change the way you look at reality as you walk around? You know,
Oh, certainly. I now paint my plein air paintings with the paintings on location look like work done with the camera, but they're not.
Interesting.
Art 2D2 has taught me to see how to select things. I talk about the calligraphy of the outline of forms. Every form has its own calligraphy, the calligraphy contour. And so when you learn to see that, this helps me see that. I see it now clearly outside without
So even when you don't have a camera, that's
just an
sort of how
ordinary
your
day.
eye is
I
aware.
notice more than I ever would have noticed before.
So it sounds like it's all about helping us pay attention.
I think time and focused attention is the benefit of it. The product is always beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you. My guests today have been Jim Sutherland and his camera Obscura Art 2D2. Jim is a professor of art at Montreat College in North Carolina. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.